Hi, welcome. In this video, we are going to discuss the nature and scope of health and safety. It is a part of IG1 new syllabus and IGC1 of old syllabus of NEBOSH International General Certificate. So let's start. So first, we are going to discuss the multidisciplinary nature of health and safety. So, what are the subjects which makes up the knowledge of health and safety? So the range of different issues which contribute to knowledge and understanding of health and safety issues are: first is the physics and chemistry. So they help to understand the properties of different substance and their behavior in different conditions. For example, electricity, explosive or flammable materials. So the next subject which help us to understand the health and safety is biological science. So they help to understand the composition and process of the living organism. So the biological science helps us to know the effect of harmful organisms on people and the reaction of human body under the stress. So similarly, next subject, the engineering helps in the construction of building and mechanical process. So the engineering helps us to have a safe design of machinery, fireproofing of buildings. Then next subject is the psychology. They explain the behavior of individual. For example, the effect of stress on mind, the motivation behind behavior of individual or group at workplace. So the next subject which help us to understand the nature of health and safety is sociology. So they explain the behavior of people in a group. For example, management process, communication in an organization. These are the examples. And the last but not the least, the law. They contain the rules and regulations of the society. So law contains the rules and regulation of the society. So law deals with the workplace activities. Now, the next topic is the barrier to the good standard of health and safety. What prevents us from having a good health and safety standards at workplace? So the first is the complexity of the problem. So uh, when the problem is very complex, uh, for example, cause and effect relationship, since in most of the time the relationship of the cause with the effects are indirect, so it is difficult to find the root causes and the way of preventing it. The generalization of the cause may not be effective in implementing the controls to the effect of hazard. So, due to the indirect uh, cause of any effect, it is difficult to find the root cause. So, the problem becomes complex. So, next is the work process. Every day, the technology is changing, which indeed is helping us to increase the productivity, but the hazards and the risk associated with it also have changed and also increased. Then next is the extent of the problem. So increased knowledge of health and safety has made it more complex. The range of issue has to be addressed along with the requirement of changing legislation. So it says that the health and safety standards are upgrading and it is becoming more and more complex. So it is difficult to keep uh, all the requirements of the health and safety. And also the legislations are changing. The legislations are upgrading according to the health and safety. So these legislations are now becoming a burden to any organization. So The organization may not be able to fulfill all the legislation, and so it becomes a barrier to a good standard of health and safety. Next is the competing and conflicting demand. So in this comes the competing market. So the organization has to compete in the market by providing goods or service in a cost effective way. Health and safety could be ignored in the way due to time and cost constraint. So the organizations have to compete in the market with the more productivity and the lesser cost. So the health and safety could be ignored because it can be seen as a non-productive cost. So now the third barrier to the good standard of health and safety is the behavioral issue. In order to successfully implement health and safety, the participation of both employer and its worker are required. So it has been estimated that most of the accidents are caused due to human error, due to carelessness or incompetency. So for the motivation of the individual or group of workers to follow health and safety may be affected by various factors, like the individual goal to earn recognition by working long hours by achieving higher goals may cause distraction from the health and safety goals of group. Next is the job suitability of individual based on physical and mental match. And next is the job satisfaction of the work meeting the individual needs would affect the priority given to health and safety. So, individual uh, may not be motivated to follow the health and safety if he has got a selfish goals to earn the recognition. So he may ignore the group of the health and safety goals of the group. Then the job may not be matching his physical and mental strength, and maybe he might not be having a job satisfaction, so he may ignore the health and safety. So these are the all behavioral issues which are barriers to a good standard of health and safety. Now we will first discuss the meaning and distinctions. We need to know the definitions of the uh, keywords which are indispensable for the health and safety. So the first we will see the definition of health. So health relates to the physical condition of both body and mind of all people, like worker, contractor, visitors at workplace, and their protection from the harm in the form of injury or disease. Now next definition is of the safety. What is safety? It is a condition at workplace that is required to be achieved to eliminate risk of harm or reduce to an acceptable level. If the harm or risk of harm could not be eliminated, then they has to be reduced to an acceptable level to uh, bring the condition at the workplace in a safe. So the next is the welfare. So what is welfare? It is the general well-being of the worker at workplace and promotion of the condition to provide their needs, like of health, comfort, social and personal well-being. So this is the definition of the welfare. So the next, our topic is environmental protection. So what do we mean by environmental protection? So these can be of two types: the workplace environment like lighting, noise, heat, the environment inside the workplace, or the external environment like pollution, damage to air, water, land, and living creature. Now we will discuss the definitions of accidents and other events. So first, what do we mean by incident? So an event that gives rise to accident or has a potential to lead to an accident. It includes both accident and near misses. So what do we mean by accident? So accident is an undesired event. Nobody will desire accident, so it is an undesired event giving rise to death, ill health, injury, damage, or loss. So accident, if the ill health is also an accident, the injury is also an accident, damage is also an accident, or any kind of loss is an accident. Now next is the near miss, the event which may lead to injury or loss but did not do so. So this leaves a lesson to be learned to prevent the reoccurring. So near miss uh, is something like uh, it had a potential to cause the injury. It did take place, but it did not harm anybody or did not do any form of loss. So we can say that type of incident is a near miss. Now the next is occupational accident. So an occurrence arising out of or in course of work which results in fatal or non-fatal injury. So the any occurrence or any incident during the working time period at the workplace which may be fatal or non-fatal injury, this is termed as occupational accident. Now what next definition we are going to see is the commuting accident. So commuting means uh, traveling from or to the workplace. From this definition, we are going to see clearly. So, an accident resulting in injury or death or direct way between place of work and the worker's principal or secondary residence. So, first is the way between the work and the residence. It may be principal or secondary uh, residence of the worker. Then the way between the work and the place where the worker takes meal. Then between the work and the place where worker receives his remuneration. So in any of this way, if the accident results in injury of death or death, it is called commuting accident. Non dangerous occurrence. So a readily identifiable event as defined under national law with a potential to cause disease or injury to person at work or public. This may involve loss or damage to equipment but without any harm to anybody. So the most important thing is it is already defined in any of the national law and it is easily identifiable event which may cause disease or injury to the person at work or at public. It may involve damage to the equipment or loss, and but it is without any harm to a person. Now, next is the occupational disease. So a disease contracted as a result of exposure to the risk factor arising from work activity. So, for example, uh, asbestosis. If the worker is working in a workplace where the asbestos is used, and after a long time he contracts asbestosis, so it is an occupational disease. Now, the next is the work-related ill health. So the main difference between health issue and safety issue is the time scale and the nature of the harm. So the health issue may not be immediate, but it may occur, or it may be discovered after a long time period after being exposed uh, to the source of harm. But the safety issue is the immediate. So this is the main difference between health issue and safety issue. So the work related ill health may be either physiological or psychological. So what are the physiological uh, factors of ill health? So the physiological problems are those disease or injuries as a result of long-term exposure to the dangerous substance in the workplace. For example, hear impairment due to noise. Now next is psychological. The psychological problems are related to the stress and includes illness or depression. Now we will discuss hazards. So a hazard is an article, substance or situation that has potential to cause harm or damage. So it can be either article, substance, or it can be a situation having a potential to cause harm or damage. So what are the workplace hazards? Uh, for example, the work at height, fire, poor lighting, noise. Machinery could be a hazard if it is not properly guarded. Chemicals, noise. Or the next is the risk. What is risk? So a risk is the likelihood of the harm to occur. The chances of occurrence of the harm is called a risk. So the degree of the risk depends on the likelihood of harm happening and the severity of the outcome, like type of injury, number of people exposed to the risk. So now we will see what are the reasons for managing health and safety. So the first is the moral reason, then legal, then economical. So these are the three broad categories for the reason for managing the health and safety. So now the moral reason for the employer to manage health and safety. So the moral reasons are based on the concept of an employer owing a duty of reasonable care to his employees. So it is a moral obligation of the employer to take care of its employee. Next is the society's expectation for the employer to have a correct attitude towards health and safety of their workers. And also the expectation of the society towards employer to have duty of care towards its contractor and public who may be affected by their work. So the three uh, reasons, the moral reasons for the employer to manage health and safety are: the first is the duty of reasonable care to his employees. Then the employer should have the society's expectation for the employer to have correct attitude towards their workers for health and safety, and the expectation of the society towards the employer to have a duty of care to the contractor as well as public who may be affected by the work of the employer. So the next is the legal reason. So, what are the legal reasons for which the employer has to manage the health and safety? So, the first is the preventive. So, the enforcement agency or inspector may issue improvement notice or prohibition notice to the employer. So, to prevent it, the employer has to follow the health and safety. So, to not so that he may not get any type of violation notice or prohibition notice. Next is punitive. The criminal court may impose fine or imprisonment for the breach of legal duties to the employer or individual. So no employer would like to get imprisonment or imposed fine on them in the criminal court. So to prevent all this, these are the one of the legal reasons. Next is compensatory. Employees may sue to employer for compensation in the civil court. So there are many legislation like Workers' Compensation Act, and it may be a different name for different countries, but almost every country has the worker compensation legislation. So no employer would like to get into that situation where they have to pay compensation. So the International Labour Organization Occupational Safety and Health Convention 1981 C155 Article 16 sorry identifies the duty of the employer towards their employees. So the ILO basically Convention 155 C155 and Article 16, it lays down what the employer has duty towards their employees. So the first is, as far as it is reasonably practicable, equipment, process, and workplace should be kept safe and without risk of health by employer under their control. So the first is the employer should keep his equipment, process, and workplace in a safe condition. Then the second is the as far as reasonably practicable, chemical, physical, and biological substance should be kept safe without the risk of health when appropriate measure of protection have been taken by the employer under their control. So the employer has to keep his chemical, physical, and biological substance in a safe manner, and he has to take adequate protection so that its employees or workers are not exposed to the risk of the uh, hazards arising out of the chemicals. Then the third is, as far as reasonably practicable, adequate protective clothing and protective equipment should be provided to prevent the risk of accident or the adverse effect on the health by the employer. So it is uh, the employer should basically provide PPEs and protective equipments to we can say to reduce the to bring the risk to an acceptable level. So the next reason for managing health and safety is the economic reason. So every uh, accident has a cost involved in it. So the cost of the accident can be a direct or calculable cost of accident. So it can be a sick pay, repair to the damaged equipment, fines, and legal fee. So this is the calculable cost, or we can say the direct cost of the accident, which are generally insured. So these are the To avoid all this, the employer should manage the risk. Next is the indirect or non-calculable cost of accident. So it is the indirect cost and it cannot be calculated, like the reputation loss, the loss of business orders, the business interruption. So this cannot be insured also. Now the another category of the cost of accident are the insured cost of accident and uninsured cost of accident. So the UK's health and safety executives iceberg model, as we can see the iceberg here, the smaller part is out of the surface of the water and the larger part is below the surface of the water. So this iceberg model was given by the UK's health and safety executive. So it can be thought of a cost of accident. The above part, the part which is above the surface of the water can be thought of an insured cost, the very little cost that can be insured, and the larger part is the uninsured cost. So the ratio of insured cost to the uninsured cost is 1 is to 8 up to 1 is to 36. Means uninsured cost is 8 times to 36 times more than what the cost of accident that can be insured. So now what are the insurances available that can cover the cost of the accident? So first is the employer's liability insurance, then public liability insurance, and motor vehicle insurance. So example is the compensation claim of the employee. Most of the legislations like Workers' Compensation Act has to be followed by the organization, and that can be insured. So next is the damage cover of the machinery. This can be insured. But what about the uninsured cost, like the product damage, legal cost, time loss in accident investigation, loss of skilled staff, loss of production time, overtime cost to replace the injured worker, and fines and criminal prosecutions, loss of reputation leading to loss of contracts. So all these are the uninsured costs. So suppose uh, like a organization uh, loses a skilled staff, so that cannot be replaced or that cannot be insured. So that is the uninsured cost of accident. So now what are the legal framework for regulating health and safety? So this means that what are the legal uh, we can say what are the legislations which regulates health and safety. So the ILO Occupational Health and Safety Convention C155 we are going to discuss. So the International Labour Organization's Occupational Safety and Health Convention 1981 C155 Article 16 identifies the duty of employer towards their employees. So as we have already discussed it before, so the employer has to keep his equipment, process and workplace in a safe condition and without a risk of health. Then an employer has to keep their chemical, physical and biological substance in a safe way by providing appropriate protection measures. Then the employer has to provide to their workers and employees adequate protective clothing and protective equipment to prevent the risk of accident. So now this ILO Convention C155 lays down the rights and responsibility of the employer. So under Article 16 of ILO C155, the rights and the responsibilities of the employers have been laid down in this convention. Also, ILO C155 Article 19 lays down the rights and responsibilities of the workers. So now, what are the employers' duties or responsibilities, and what are the workers' duties and responsibilities and rights? So the employer should ensure that the equipment are safe, then chemical, biological, and physical substances at his control are in safe condition. Then the employer should provide adequate protective clothing and protective equipment, and the employer should implement the operational control to reduce the risk. So these are the responsibilities of the employer. But now, what are the responsibilities of the workers? So the worker should follow the employer's safe procedure. The worker should ensure their own safety. They should not put themselves in a risk. Then the worker should communicate the hazard to their supervisor, which cannot be rectified by them. And the worker should stop the work and remove themselves if they find themselves in any kind of danger. So these are the duties or responsibilities and rights of the worker, which are under the international ILO's Occupational Safety and Health Convention C155.